All right, let's dive into a really fascinating moment in history, a moment where everything could have gone so differently. We're going to be looking at the Texas Conventions of the 1830s and this central puzzle of the whole story. How did a series of totally peaceful meetings designed to prevent a fight end up paving the road directly to war?
And that's really the big question we're trying to answer today, isn't it? How does a formal, organized, and, peaceful request for change get so twisted that it becomes a justification for revolution? Let's unpack this thing. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in Mexican Texas, it's the early 1830s, and things are tense. Tensions between the Anglo settlers and the Mexican government are really starting to simmer. And it wasn't just about one little thing, it was a whole collection of grievances that were just about to hit a boiling point.
Now, what's so interesting is just how practical these problems were. I mean, you've got settlers getting really frustrated by new taxes they thought were completely unfair. They were suddenly cut off from their friends and family by a ban on any more immigration from the U.S., and maybe the biggest one of all, they felt like they had zero say in their own local government. All the big decisions were being made hundreds of miles away in Mexico City.
So what did they do? Well, they didn't immediately grab their guns. Nope. Instead, their first move was completely political. They decided to take a path of civic action. They started organizing, getting together, and formally writing down their demands in a way they hoped the government just couldn't ignore.
And you have to understand, this was not some fringe movement with a couple of angry farmers. We're talking about the heavy hitters here, major figures like Stephen F. Austin and even a newly arrived Sam Houston. Having them at these conventions, well, that sent a clear signal that this was a serious, coordinated effort by the Anglo leadership to find a peaceful way forward.
And check out how this all escalated. This table really shows it perfectly. In 1832, the demands were pretty straightforward. Get rid of the immigration ban, lower our taxes, and please grant Texas separate statehood within the Mexican Republic. And that part's crucial. They weren't asking for independence. But when those requests were basically ignored, they met again in 1833. They repeated all the same demands, but then they took this incredibly bold step. They wrote an entire state constitution. They weren't just asking for statehood anymore. They were showing the government exactly what a self-governing Texas would look like.
So, with their petitions and a brand new constitution in hand, the Texans needed somebody to carry their message all the way to the Capitol. They needed a diplomat, an advocate, someone who could actually argue their case to the highest levels of the Mexican government.
And that monumental task, it fell to Stephen F. Austin. His mission, as you see here, was pretty clear, but also incredibly difficult. Get to Mexico City, persuade the government with their carefully laid out arguments, and come back with these vital reforms. Pretty much all their hopes for a peaceful resolution were resting entirely on his shoulders.
Okay, so let's just recap for a second. We've got a peaceful, organized effort. We have a list of what they saw as totally reasonable demands. And they have a respected diplomat carrying the message. The million-dollar question is, how did the Mexican government respond?
Their answer was swift, and it was brutal. They arrested him. Instead of negotiation, Austin was met with pure suspicion. See, Mexico City was in the middle of its own political chaos, with centralists trying to tighten their grip on power. So they saw this Texan request for more local control not as a conversation, but as a direct threat. Austin was thrown in prison, accused of trying to start an insurrection. For the Texans back home, this was just an unbelievable betrayal. Their voice of reason was now a political prisoner.
And this, right here, is the turning point. Austin's arrest wasn't just some political insult, it was a clear, unmistakable message from the Mexican government. We're done talking. That path of peaceful reform was officially a dead end.
This is the conclusion that just rippled across Texas. Throwing their chosen representative in jail convinced even the most moderate settlers that the government was never, ever going to listen. The door on peaceful negotiation had just been slammed shut, and the door to armed conflict was suddenly blown wide open.
Let's put a name to what the Texans were trying to do here. This is a perfect example of what we call civic action. They were using the legitimate political channels, meetings, petitions, diplomacy to try and solve their problems. They were trying to work within the system before they even thought about going outside of it.
And this brings us right back to where we started. The story of the Texas Conventions shows us what happens when a government sees a petition for reform not as a dialogue, but as a threat. It forces us to ask a really difficult question that echoes all through history. What happens when civic action fails?